And once that secret exists on a team level, it's game over. In software development, people can keep secrets for very long periods of time. It'd be amazing how long an engineering manager and a group of people can keep a secret about what's happening on their team because they don't feel like they will be trusted if they tell the truth. They don't feel like people will give them a second chance.
Ever seen a great game contained within a dysfunctional studio? Have you encountered a fantastic set of game devs, but they just didn't have a clear goal to aim for? What does it look like to think about product in a way that reinforces the goals and culture of an organization? Any game studio that wants to be successful long-term has to take care of their vision for the games they are making and the company overall, and also the culture of the people that make them. As scale happens and life and work get busy, it's easy to fall into bad patterns that undermine everything. To talk about how to think about product and culture in a better way, we've got John Cutler. John Cutler actually did some game development very early in his career and now leads product organizations and teaches others how to think about product and culture in a healthy way. John, it's great to have you. To kick us off, what's your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, awesome to be here. The lightning version is I dropped out of college. I had a small video game studio doing a mass market bartending game, which was a trip. Then I got involved in music and basically spent my 20s just messing around. And then I got serious about, trying to have a career. And it turned out that this software product stuff was my thing. And yeah, since then I've been writing about it a lot, worked at different companies, met with lots of companies as part of my job. It's been fun.
You're often posting useful thoughts, again, in my opinion, but they really are, about how to be a good product thinker. I'll be honest, I think it's a pretty rare gift to be capable at product thinking. And I've worked at a few different places in my life. I've done a lot of consulting the last 4 years. That person who can really refine in on what it means to think about product well, they're a gem, and I value them so immensely because it is so rare. And that's interesting because there are so many people out there with a title that has product in it. So the huge question, what makes it so difficult?
Well, the thought experiment I use, the very specific example is, imagine if you don't have a product manager, but you have really gifted designers, you have really gifted technology folks, and then play out in your mind what potentially can go wrong. So in theory, if you have those folks around, you can go a long way. I mean, there's brilliant game designers, there's brilliant technologists. And that's a way that I back into kind of what product thinking is, because I think in a lot of situations, maybe it's not a healthy culture. You might have really talented designers and talented engineers, but it doesn't quite work. So the thought experiment I use working backwards is, imagine a healthy environment. Imagine really talented designers and talented engineers and some vision about what they're doing, and then what could possibly go wrong. And I think that that's actually a helpful exercise to thinking about the traits that product managers bring to the situation, about why maybe it's rare. And I think that that mix of thinking about the viability, the market viability of this thing, there's plenty of great ideas that don't end up producing great products. I mean, example, there's products that people like that Google has built that just weren't viable. And they said they eventually kill those products and the early adopters don't like it. So that's one thing could go wrong. And that's one trait that those sort of rare product thinkers have, is they have a way to play forward the viability of a product in the landscape that it is, and know that there's a there. I think that's really important. The other thing that you can have when you have a lot of these talented folks around is you just spiral. You go in circles all the time. When I had my game, I remember going to E3 and I was at this weird hostel called the Dream Hostel in Atlanta, which was where all the indie game people were staying because they couldn't afford to stay in big hotels. And I remember there sitting with these developers from Northern Europe, and they were showing me this incredible frame rate for this driving game. I mentioned I got carsick. I got carsick playing this game. It was so fluid that it made me uncomfortable. There was something weird in the game that I don't know. And they were talking about the frame rate and just how amazing it is and how long they had spent on it and how long they had done that. And it's like they had gone in circles. I was just wondering, what's the story here? Like, what is this for? Like, do people buy it just for the frame rate? Or are you trying to maybe pitch what you've done to another studio? Like, hey, we don't really have a great game here, but we really know how to make this product go fast or something. And that's another thing that happens when you have really talented people around, is that sometimes they just lose focus. They lose a little bit of that bias forward. They get really deep in their craft, and then they don't step back and think about direction, think about moving forward, thinking about that bias to action. So those two things, for example, just the viability aspect, is there something here? And then that instinct about when to push forward and not circle around craft for too much, but to sort of push forward in a direction, I think it's hard to describe, but I can give you the analogy too. I used to play music a lot, and there was music producers who they just knew, that take is good enough. We have bigger mission here to finish this album. We have a bigger thing to do here. And I know we could get a little better, but maybe not even. Doing 100 more takes isn't going to give it this, or making the frame rate that much higher isn't going to do it for us here. We've got to keep pushing forward to realize our vision here. And I think that a lot of folks who have that product thinking thing, there's probably like 3, 4, 5 other traits that I can think of, but those are things that stand out for me.
That idea of going like, okay, wait, what actually matters to you? What do you care about? How do I not just yell at you for not caring about the right things like I do, right? Again, if you're that sort of egotistical person who's just like, hey, you should all view the world the way I do, but actually going like, okay, wait a minute, what is it that you value? How do I leverage what you value while also not allowing it to take over and run us down a pit? I heard a story recently about, this happens all the time in game development where a team or a subsection of a team sort of goes down a rabbit hole of, ooh, we could make this a little better. Ooh, we could tweak this. And you're like, wait a minute. You're at so the wrong level of granularity for where our product is right now. Like you're in there, you're tweaking fine elements of like an animation and trying to make something look just right, as if it's like, dude, we don't even know what the game is yet, right? We haven't even figured out what the core game looks like. But it makes sense, right? It's like, hey, I got pulled in because, again, I wanted to make it amazing. I wanted to make it phenomenal. And yes, but phenomenal right now maybe means maximizing learning, not quality. And it's a different frame.
It's a psychology, too, of the folks. Like, if a product manager in my realm who's at any kind of sort of generative or healthy company starts treating the people around them as just like little units of production, this idea of like, oh, I have this sort of finite amount of energy and programming and typers, and I need to somehow just fill them up, and then out's going to pop these features or out's going to pop stuff like that. It's such a demeaning way to work, and you lose your credibility as a product manager. And specifically, an example there would be, it's one thing to show up at a meeting and just say, I'm concerned about the progress that we're making because of X, Y, and Z, and I want to work with you because I want us to keep our North Star in mind, that the player, maybe in the case of a game, is really our North Star. And we've decided that this part of the experience is really what's going to hold it together. And I want to help, if you need my help to unblock some of these, maybe we're getting distracted by other parts of the business, or maybe there's a lot of reactive issues supporting some game we've already put out there, or whatever it is. And be a partner in that is so much different than positioning yourself of like, I'm this, proxy for someone else in the business, and I'm here to watch over you and hoard over you and crack some sort of whip that I'm here keeping the burn down chart going or whatever.
Yeah.
I just don't think great things are made that way. Even if your goal is to move it along, like that motivation has to come from within people to be like, oh, geez, we need to triage some scope here and figure out where all this reactive work is going so we can focus on the mission at hand. That's kind of like a maker thing to say, but you can't be forced into saying that
Yeah.
through some, metrics or burn down chart or cracking some whip or anything like that.
There's a part too. You referred to that as a partner, and versus it is so often framed as a product manager is like, well, I represent the business, right? Like I am an advocate for the business to this team, and so the business has all the money, so you're all slaves to the business basically, and that means you're a slave to me because I am the business to you. And a real practical way that this popped out, and I know this debate has gone on for a long time. I really don't know where the overall answer people have landed on is, but I was really surprised when I first started seeing people advocating for, like in a very tactical thing, oh no, product people shouldn't go to the stand-up. The stand-up's for the team. The product person would disrupt the team if they were there. Like that has to be a private, safe space for the team to talk. And I was like, wait a minute. Did you hear what you just said? The implication there is that if a product manager shows up, suddenly the space isn't safe. That's your problem. It's not having a product manager in your... Of course they should be in the stand-up. They're helping the team focus and align and stay on what matters most day to day. Like, I'm not saying, if you ever miss one, I'm going to chase you down to beat you over the head or something, but seriously, like, you should be there. You should be interacting with the team at that level. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Oh, 100%. Another one is like product managers shouldn't come to the retro.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Yep.
Or these things. And I think this is also where you have a little bit of legacy ideas around software development and other things, that there is a business and that by devising these weird development methodologies, and this is where I really kind of single out something like Scrum or whatever. Scrum is this weird trust fall idea. It's like, if we're just super transparent about everything we do and we have all these weirdo rituals and all these weird roles and titles, and we come up with all these weird points and this and that and all these theatrical things that somehow will establish trust with the quote unquote business, and then we'll have this deal. And the deal is you can put stuff in the backlog, but we won't look at it until we're about to work on it. And the deal is that we can pivot for you all the time if you need to. That's not really how really product forward companies work or build products. Now, I think that's kind of a remnant of tech being some centralized internal part of companies and throwing stuff over the wall so that tech could go off and build it. More of like a centralized IT function.
Yeah.
Now, maybe this has no bearing whatsoever in games at the moment.
Oh, no. It's relevant.
I don't know.
It's relevant.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of a view of technology about how they do it. And this idea that these teams are creative problem solvers and you're targeting them on something that really matters, and they have some autonomy and leeway to be able to do that, and that's the unit that you're talking about of creativity, that's really an important point. It's really, you can't solve those trust issues, I've learned, just with a more performative set of rituals.
Yeah.
Because, you need to have shared confidence that you are doing something great together. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens. And I'm pretty sure with games, I bet it's like this too, that, there's probably some studios that maybe have like one or two successes, but really they're just eating away at the culture of the company and the desire. And there's a lot of weird power dynamics, and, maybe the narrative or the franchise is good and they're just sort of riding that out, but it eats away at companies from the inside, even when there's success. Like, you can go pretty far in this, what I call like a feature factory approach. You can actually get pretty far that way, especially when you have some early product market fit with what you're doing and you're just building what people want and you're just doing it. But if you treat your teams like that, it doesn't, you're not tending to the garden, and then things kind of implode from inside.
And this is also something I think product management is there to bring, more so than perhaps any other discipline in a company. Whatever you want to call them, but your long-term, mid-term, short-term time horizon and the ability to go. I get it. Like, there's a lot of people right now thinking short-term, and a lot of us have an awareness of the mid-term, but is there somebody in this organization who's going, well, what is the long-term? Is there one? Do we know what that is? Because if we could actually understand that and communicate that into the org, we may make different decisions today as whoever you are, that gets us in that right direction. Again, sort of the North Star, but actually making that concrete. Anyway, that's what came to mind when you were talking about that.
Yeah, there's so many, and I think that's the element of, a lot of times these product people are just so under the gun, they're so stressed, they're just caught in this sandwich of all these different parties, and they just sort of are in this sort of mode of desperation. And I kind of think that that's part of the talent of the people who have whatever that thing is. This will sound really controversial, but I was thinking, someone the other day said, "Are product managers born?" And this is like a really heavy, weird thing for someone to say. You're not supposed to say that about any type of role now. But I tried to play a very generous interpretation of what they said, because they brought up an example that I had noticed too, where very junior product managers without a lot of experience had actually been really amazing product managers. And I was like, well, what is this? Like, what is it that someone who's been doing this for 10, 15 years can be all over the place, and someone who's been doing this for 1 year? And so I'm not going to say that people are born with this or not, but they'd certainly had some of these traits of problem solving, about being kind of cool under pressure, not being completely wrapped up in the drama of all the stakeholders, sort of maybe even a little bit of ability to be like a little bit numb to some stuff that's going on. Some of these good PMs just are like kind of cool cats. Yeah. They just don't let a lot of stuff phase them.
Yeah.
And they're doing that. So I don't think these are things I think these are skills people can learn. But I tried to give this person this sort of benefit of the doubt with this statement and think, you know what? There might be like a tiny ounce of truth in that there's some, just character traits that people develop as PMs that allow them, especially in the context of just not letting the world collapse in on them. Just kind of keeping your cool.
There's a question then that this leads me to that I wanted to ask you about. And I think this is right on there as it relates to this idea of, are you born with this? So if someone wanted to get into what I'll call product leadership or product thinking, what are questions you would ask them to get a sense of like, hey, are you likely to be good at this? Are you likely to succeed at this? Like, how would you talk to them? What would you ask them?
Yeah, this goes precisely to that question too, because I actually think a lot of product managers out there right now don't really like product management. They saw it as this role where they were going to be, it's kind of lucrative, at least in my area, to be a PM. You don't need a lot of, it's these more sort of weird soft skills going into it. You can read this blog and be like, I think I could get through that interview. No one's going to give you like a coding test. No one's going to give you ask for your portfolio on that level of thing. And then you catch up with them, a couple years into it. They're like, I don't really like this all that much. It's not scratching the itch that I thought that it was going to scratch. And so I think that when I'm talking to people about the product stuff, there is this sort of mix of a bit of entrepreneurialism, a kind of passionate problem solver, and they're curious about why people buy things, why people do things, so I'll be with someone and I'm observing them observe the world, and they'll say, it's so weird here. I was just here in this coffee shop and, isn't it weird that they put the drinks there and then they serve them this way and they do that? I'm like, okay, this might be and then they'll say something like, oh, when I was a kid, I spun up this weird thing. I'll be like, oh, I can completely relate to that. And, so there's a mix of curiosity and then problem solving interests and then wanting to kind of think big and zero in about going. They have this ability to kind of be really big picture and then get really specific, really big picture and really specific. In fact, if engineers or designers were to go up and down that stack so consistently as PMs, their heads would explode because their specific is really specific. But PMs kind of have this general thing. However, one thing I would say is that it's important not to stereotype because, for example, there are a lot of people who maybe slipped into general business education and they've got the exact skills that we talked about. Like they're just skilled, like they're skilled problem solvers, skilled thinkers. They have a market sense. They have a little bit of an entrepreneurial sense. They have a desire to be part of something, to be a team player, but not necessarily the desire to go super. They're not like obsessive craft folks in one area or another. That could be a good thing. But there's folks like me who came from music or came from production. They might not be as deep in the business thing. They might not be like, they understand business. They understand there's a P&L. They understand that kind of stuff. But that's not their strong suit. They're just more of like a crafty problem solver. So I think that sounds so general and vague, and that's the beast that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
At the moment. The one bit of advice I'd give to people, though, in the current market is get good at something and then try product management. Because I get kind of worried when some of these folks, like there's like it is a little bit of a Ponzi pyramid scheme. I mean, there's only so many product leaders. There's tons of product people. Yeah. The market shifts in terms of like, do you need someone on the team level or not? Companies are, often being like, oh, our PMs they're not doing much. Like, I guess they could have more teams or they could have that type of thing. So I also think that just spend some time getting good at or getting exposure to the making of the thing. It could be in customer success. It could be in QA. It could be in so maybe not sales as much, but it could be in marketing or product marketing, sort of seeing how the sausage is made. That's a really good thing. I don't know how it translates to the game domain as well, but I worry when someone's like in the beginning of their career and they're hedging all their bets. And then you ask them, like, have you made anything? Have you shipped anything? Like, and they're like, no. I just got out of business school. This is going to be great. I'm going to be one of these PM people and I'm going to, be a venture capitalist or something like that. I'm like, oh, the motivations are off. Like, I don't know how that's going to work for you to do it. So,
yeah. That's interesting. I'm thinking of my own experience because early on when I was at Riot, they had one production discipline. We were all just producers. And then they split the discipline into the dev management discipline, which was more delivery and operationally oriented, and the product management, which was not quite a traditional product management organization. It was more like a game version of that. So they were like really still largely generalist leaders / producer types, but with some responsibilities that are very similar to what you'd see a traditional product manager doing. And at the time, I'd been the teams were all running some version of Scrum, and they had the product owner and Scrum Master roles, and I'd done both. I was doing both at the time, and they were like, "Well, what do you want to do? You seem like you've got some skills on the product side and some skills on the Scrum Master side, and whatever that means, and where do you want to go?" And I remember thinking about it. I remember just going like, "Look, I have opinions. I mean, I have no shortage of opinions. Like that's just part of the way I'm wired. I think about everything." But I really don't care that much what I'm working on. I mean, as long as it's not bad.
Let's get back to that. Yeah, that trait of like, that's what I mean. Is like you could tell this person like, oh, we're going to take a vacation to wine country or something, and they'd be like, oh, that's I'm so curious about it. Let's just like make that awesome. Like it's not the planning instinct as much as like,
no,
oh, that problem's fun. But if someone in a company was like, oh, I need you to make a microsite for this, it'd be like, well, that seems interesting. It captures that level of like curiosity and desire to just grapple with a problem. That's interesting.
And one for me, I went towards people. I went towards the dev management side, and it was because like, look, I have opinions about this, but I see people out there, and I've always wondered about this. Like that as a product manager, someone who's like, no, I don't just have opinions. I actually really care. I'm passionate about finding. Because for me, I'm like, yeah, this champion, okay, it has this abilities, has that abilities, whatever. That's all fine. Like, yep, that. I'll ask a bunch of questions and see if I almost would say that I crowdsourced my product management when I had to do it through the team and through others, which isn't. I actually don't think that's a terrible approach, but I was just looking at it, I'm going like, man, I care so much more about the people and the team functioning well. Like that, I'm so passionate about. Where the product side, I just don't have as strong a vibe on it. And again, I ended up going to dev management. haven't done product ownership, not really since. I've still had to think like that, somewhat often in my career, especially now that I have my own business. It's like I'm thinking like that all the time, and I'm realizing like, yeah, I made the right choice. This isn't me. This is where I'm uncomfortable. But yeah, and it is. Yeah. Anyway, so I've always been curious about that.
Well, and it's funny that this is why I tell people to just sort of slow down a little bit and see exactly what they observe, because, there are aspects of product management related to the sort of the business and the coordinating this stuff and doing these things that not everyone's cup of tea. It seems like a really glamorous role. Like, I'm going to be the PM of this, or I'm going to be the thing. And, I've even found over the years being sort of applying that applying that product thinking to other problems, even in engineering management or other things where it's like, oh, okay, how are we going to create sources of sustainable and differentiated growth here? Or how are we going to do that? So I do encourage people to explore the domain that they're in and not necessarily to default just to product, because it is true that, like, a good example is in my area, there's companies that have pretty healthy cultures where engineering leads and design leads together are largely shaping what people normally think of as the product.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
The product manager is there. They're a little bit more outward facing. There's a great relationship with the team. The product manager is sort of scoping these larger points in the market to go. And if you're an engineering lead and you want to scratch that itch, there's a company here in Santa Barbara called Appfolio, and I remember they brought in engineers and then exposed them to more product-like ways of working. And I swear a lot of those engineers could just be really successful product managers if they wanted.
Yeah.
They're really good because they've been exposed in that environment. So I think it's also like, people should think it through a little bit about what do they really enjoy.
Yeah.
As part of it is, and then ask if that's the right fit for them.
So let's get really specific if we can. What answers, if someone's like, hey, this is what I really enjoy, would you go, yeah, you seem like you'd probably be a good product manager? Because obviously, like, I think you said there's a couple motivations that we would all probably agree are suspect. It's, hey, the product manager seems to be in charge of everything, and I like being in charge of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, not a great one, right? And then the other one is, like you said, hey, I know there's a lot of money in it, and I hope to eventually turn this into being like a partner to VC. And so that's my plan for how I'm going to basically buy myself a Lamborghini someday and whatever, right? Like, it's like, okay, cool. Also a suspect motivation. But what are the things where it's like, hey, this is what you're interested in. This is what drives you.
Oh, yeah. Let's get specific with that. I mean, one thing, you do meet people that will say this. They're like, you know what? I wasn't very good at coding. And you know what? I wasn't very good at design. But I found what I was really good at was being part. I wanted to be part of a group of people making something, and I wanted to figure out how I could always help them make the best decisions, provide the best environment for that to happen, and contribute in my own way to that. And what I would regard that is that the person realized kind of they didn't have that aptitude for. They wouldn't have made a great engineer. They might not have made a great designer, but they found out that they liked helping foster the creativity and loved being part of it. If someone who doesn't want to be part of it, part of the team, part of the excitement, helping share the wins with other people. And so there is, and that's a trait that's really, really interesting that, people acknowledge that. I'd say that another thing are the people who are just always obsessed and interested in products, like back to what I said, and like why things work and why things sell and why this happened. That's another interesting example. Those are two things. Like there's this sort of, they don't want to necessarily be the figurehead, but they like being part of this thing and then offering context, offering data, offering other things that can help along those other people. And those are some things that I was thinking about.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to topic switch you slightly.
Sure.
I see you post a lot about culture and leadership. What got you interested in those topics and sort of drove you to learn so much about that?
I'm obsessed with a couple problems or opportunities, I guess, when it comes to that side. And one is just when you meet teams and you just see how damaging even some little elephant in the room can be to how everyone is showing up. And I think that that's a big deal. Like there's some people who are into leadership because they really like the idea of talking about leadership. I'm not really into leadership because of the idea of talking about leaders. Like I call it like the Hudson News approach. It's like, if you ever been to an airport, there's the books, the leadership books, kind of like lean in and like, you're the one. And, you've got this, or whatever those books are. That's not really my thing. I don't like reading those books. I'm not into it. I'm not into that idea. But the ability for leaders to create environments and foster environments where creativity can happen and where coherence can emerge, and what they can do and can't do about that is something that fascinates me. So, I'm really obsessed. Sometimes when things are going wrong, the first thing the leaders will say is like, well, obviously we didn't have the right people in the right roles. It's a little like, I get really into that statement. Like I push back on that statement. It's like, yeah, you're right, but you haven't exactly been doing your best to create a situation where there's clear, like, do you only want a company where people are pushing back on you? Like, is that, you want people to be so rock star that you can be an even bigger rock star, and then therefore they're going to not put up with your shit? Like, what are you saying? So I get into a lot of that sort of intersection of the leaders' behaviors and how they think about the overall system of things. Another thing that I'm fascinated by are just complete asymmetries of perception, where a team is literally operating at some many multiple slower or less effective than they could be.
Yeah.
And yet there's this kind of surface dialogue about like, well, should we do 120 story points or not? And it's like, anyone who's done this before looks at what's going on and like, we are operating in sludge at the moment. Right. And you're talking about like that thing. So I get, again, it's kind of these product manager traits. Like I just get obsessed with the sort of fun elements and asymmetries of this problem that happens to overlap leadership and culture and things like that. And I distinguish that a little bit because there's people who like study org culture.
Yeah.
And that they love org culture. There's also the org culture books in that Hudson News part. And there's the people who talk about leaders as just like that. I appreciate that stuff, but that's not exactly my jam. I just like I like observing the mess a lot. Hence, I named my newsletter The Beautiful Mess. But
yeah. And that there's a pragmatism to what you're describing in the approach, in that you've seen a lot of teams and you've realized that maybe they're really effective and you're going, why? Or maybe they're not really effective and why? And we talk about this a lot in this podcast, but we view leadership through this language. We call it like holistic leadership because you need to come up with a term for it. But it's basically saying, hey, leaders need to be aware of 3 different layers of an organization: the cultural layer, the vision or product vision layer, and the process layer. And the problem that I think we have is that leaders are primarily trained to not be leaders, but to be managers of the process layer, and have limited training, awareness, ways to interact with the cultural and the product vision layer. But if you ask anybody who looks at those layers and goes, well, would you rather have a phenomenal process but a terrible other two, or a wonderful culture and a great product vision with a terrible process? Like, you take the second one every time, because you can figure out the process. You'll figure out, but try to figure out a culture once it's busted. Like, it's doable. It's way harder, way harder.
I think this is also my interest in kind of, complex adaptive systems. And I think the process fixation also just comes from certain views about how work happens or how work works. that's driven by that. I actually don't think there's anything wrong with process centricity, because there's domains where process centricity is going to be really, really helpful. But a great example for folks are, in a lot of things with the work we do, you have to figure out where you're going to be stubborn about something to help grow the culture, and when you're going to allow mistakes to happen, when you're going to allow uncertainty is a signal of opportunity in our space. Uncertainty is not a signal of opportunity when you're trying to make sure every shoe looks the same that comes off the line. In fact, variability is not something we want. Whereas in a lot of the product work we do is like variability is something that we want. And so I think that that's what drives a little bit of this, like, it's just people maybe trained in different ways, trying to apply that to a particular setting, and then it backfiring for them when they're doing it. One other thing, though, is it's like, even in this product world that I'm in, there are people, especially in Silicon Valley, who are like, screw process, process doesn't matter. It's all culture. It's all merit. It's all what we do. You never can get out of the woods with people being super opinionated and not sort of like two things can be true. So once you're in the process side, you're a little bit like, oh God, these process folks are talking my ear off. But then you get onto this other side with people who have no appreciation for the sort of cumulative sort of synergy of the people working together. They're all like, they see people as a bunch of little individual geniuses getting work done, give a developer a task, then get out of the way. And that's it. That's how the world's going to work. And it's very like promotion driven development is very popular in Silicon Valley, where everything is arranged around you getting a promotion, keeping you as a prized bit of talent in that company. And everything is very performative, like, oh, you added this many dollars. It's like, yeah, but you negotiated with your boss the opportunity to have this sweet project that had a clear ROI with what you're doing. So I like to remind people of that. Like, it's not like you're never out of the woods with dogmatic interpretations of what leadership and management should be, no matter where you go. So I think that's what I find to be really interesting.
Yeah. You have to be operating at all three layers if you want overall to be long-term successful.
And I think also it kind of boils down sometimes to be very specific about behaviors. I wrote a post recently which was like, what behaviors might we observe in a company that was more product forward than in other companies? And there's very specific examples like storytelling. Like, hey, at this company last week, the product manager came and sort of met with an engineering lead and a designer and started pitching this, talking about this thing. And the designer and the engineering lead pushed back. And they said, I'm sorry, but like, we need a bit more evidence here. Like, we need more evidence of a customer thing. But they said it in a nice way. That pushback, where an engineer and a designer would feel like they could go and say to a PM, this is what, we're unsure about this. And this is a more frontline example of what might happen on that level.
Yeah.
But, the idea that, for example, from leaders and encouraging this type of behavior, I think for a lot of them are somewhat distant from it too. But I mean, it might be simple things like, hey, when we're celebrating our wins, it's not just about shipping the thing. It's talking about the outcomes that this has created for our customers. Another thing that you tend to see as well is, this boils down to sometimes even the investment decisions of the company. If your product is driving growth, and if your product is attractive to the market and can be used in ways that don't necessarily involve ponying up a ton of money at first, it provides like material ways for the company to be successful. So you might see a leader in the company saying like, I'm really grateful for the work of this team because we can't attach revenue to it at the moment, but they've done some things which have allowed us to do that. Maybe as a leader, you might be still kind of not strict on deadlines, but you might encourage the team to think about the importance of time in this situation. But you might say something like, team, I know that you might have interpreted from me that there's a lot of different priorities, but I think ultimately at the moment, you kind of have my permission to drop anything to unblock that work, because that's where the biggest opportunity costs are at the moment.
And I did see this earlier, but so you posted a story about a CTO deleting the entire backlog at what seemed like a pretty decent sized company.
Yeah.
And obviously LinkedIn, you got a character limit that I run into all the time because I don't know how to write short amounts of things, so I only write long ones. But I'm curious about the context behind that. It seemed like it worked out really well, and I'm also just impressed and going, man, I wish more people would do something like that. And then, by the way, this I'm talking about in game development even, because I think this actually becomes quite a problem.
Yeah. Well, this is funny because I think for a lot of people that type of action seems super extreme. There are groups of people in the sort of like lean community or Kanban community, especially in the consulting side, that have often had to try to stimulate that type of thing where, you know, they didn't delete the backlog. They just put like a hard whip.
It's like anything older than
item.
anything older than X amount or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, in theory, there's a theory and there's a practicality. I mean, basically what the person did is just stop everything you're doing. And this is what's so mind-boggling for people to think, is that they see 500 people super, super busy. And in the story, they tell everyone to kind of stop what you're doing and then just start the most valuable thing and then see who needs to be involved for that. So it's kind of what everyone dreams prioritization would look like. Like we all dream prioritization at companies would be like, all right, I'm the CEO, and this year here's a force rank list of priorities, and I want to say first top one, anyone who can contribute, even in the smallest way, I want you to contribute to that, or don't get in the way. And that means don't overwhelm some marketing person who's working on that with your dumb thing.
Right.
And then go to number 2, just kind of work down the list. Like anyone who does this from the maker side of it is like, that would be a dream, because it allows you to sort of like prioritize. Like that's how we'd want to prioritize. But what happens in most organizations, there's such like, pressure to keep everyone busy that everyone invents work. I mean, I remember being on one team. It's like, oh, the central ops team is backed up. What could we dream up to be busy on? And they would keep coming up with more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. And it's like, oh, that person needs their promotion. Therefore, they need to spin up a project. And, you just come up with all this work. So in the story, the person goes in and is just like, stop everything, find the critical path. Like, what's the thing that has the highest opportunity cost? And they challenge the notion, too, that you can only have 2 people work on it. They're like, how many people could we really get to contribute to this if they were working together and just focusing on it? I do get into trouble with people that sometimes, because what I've learned from these folks in my own experience is when people don't have anything else to do and you throw in 30 people into a room and say, you got to figure out how to make this happen, they're pretty creative to do it. So when you're very busy, people will say, well, you can't have any more than 3 developers work on that. But when you release all the constraints and you're like, hey, developers, I'm not putting the same pressure on you that existed before, but are there ways that you could work to contribute to make this happen? And they're like, oh, there kind of is, like that group could work on this and we could resolve any, commit conflicts or anything like that. So by saying stop everything, delete the backlog, what they're doing is they're allowing the team to challenge their preconceptions about how many people can work on things, who should be working on things. And the leader just sat there every morning and kind of onboarded in the next effort, made sure that was going to be in healthy hands. When they thought that was going to be in healthy hands, they brought in the next effort. And they gave the permission to everyone to be like, just do self-improvement. If you can get something done in an hour, 2 or 3, pull something off some bug list, do that, but don't get in the way. Don't get in the way until we've worked this out. And what the analogy that I gave is that it's like, it was sort of like a timeout zone. It was like a demilitarized move.
Yeah.
Where you can imagine there's a battle and there's all this dysfunction and there's all this crap. And someone gave people permission to have a fresh start and put all the baggage that happened before to the side and say, we're not going to spend all day. Half the problems in companies is people are spending all day trying to figure out who to blame. And no one wants it to be them. And so they just fight. Change isn't hard per se. It's actually the battle for who's going to get the credit and who's going to get blamed for the change. That's a much bigger problem to that. People don't mind change when you make it safe for them to change, to do these things. So by creating this sort of kind of peace treaty or ceasefire in the org, they were able to give people that opportunity to like come clean. And this is one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is often people are on a team, they know something really bad is going on. They know they're struggling under intense amount of debt, or they're trying to do it. They don't feel like they can tell anyone because their team's under a lot of scrutiny. Therefore, it's a little secret that the team keeps to themselves. It's like, it's a secret that things are not really working the way we want it to work here, because the people judging them are going to be harsh on their judgment. And once that secret exists on a team level, it's game over. Because people in software development, people can keep secrets for very long periods of time. It'd be amazing how long an engineering manager and a group of people can keep a secret about what's happening on their team, because they don't feel like they will be trusted if they tell the truth. They don't feel like people will give them a second chance. So they keep this crap going on, this thing. And so what this leader did is like give everyone permission to sort of be like, this is a fresh start. You're not burdened down by this massive backlog. You're not burdened. If you've been struggling under a lot of debt, I'm creating a safe space for you to talk about what you were trying to do. And so I thought that was really, really inspiring. And the funny part about that situation is, I think it was like in weeks or months, they were back to getting as much as they used to get done, but with half the people.
Yeah.
Now, this is where the trust problem happens. If you're worried about layoffs, you're not going to do this activity, because you're just like, what if they find out that they could get just the same amount of done with half the people? But if you're in a trusting environment and some leaders like, no one will get fired here. Our goal is to be really efficient here, and you're going to keep your job, we might find out we could do a whole other game. If we refigure. So this is this problem of trust. It's like once people have any doubt about the motives behind any of these kind of activities or resets or quarterly goals or annual goals or whatever, they're not going to be honest about what's happening. So this is the game that person played really well in that setting.
Is there anything else that you really wanted to, this audience is leaders and producers in game dev frustrated with solving wrong problems. Anything else you wanted to say to that group before we wrap up?
No, I'm pretty cooked at this point. Yeah, I didn't eat beforehand, so I think that my dasher is nearby.
Nice!
That's
fantastic.
That's a good sign. Yeah.
John, thanks a ton for coming.
Absolutely.
And talking with
pleasure.
me. This has been awesome. I really appreciate the insights and also just the balanced perspective that you take around so many of these topics. Keep doing what you're doing. And if you're out there, go check out John. He's on LinkedIn. You're on Twitter as well. I think you're on Twitter as well. Not as much.
Don't check that as much as I used to.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, where should people find you? What do you want to plug?
Sign up for the newsletter is usually a good way.
Okay.
You can reply to the newsletter emails, and I just learned the other day because I explored some spam folder that all the replies were going to me. So now that's not in spam anymore. And so, in theory, I can now see people replying to the newsletter.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. We'll wrap it up here, and I'll catch you all next time. Thanks for listening.
Cool. Yep. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I want to quickly summarize what we just talked about. The first thing, product thinkers bring two things to your organization that you need. The first is to understand what's viable in the real market. And the second is to help teams understand when they need to keep going and when they've done enough for something to be good enough. Second, you're going to make better games and products by keeping people aligned to a North Star than you will trying to make sure they are all busy all the time. Third, you can't build the trust and confidence you need through progressively better rituals or practices or anything like that. Going that route will eventually ruin you and your culture. Fourth, be wary of going into product management as a professional in games or elsewhere. It's easy to look at it as a cool gig and then realize you don't enjoy it, or to get into it for the wrong reasons and just cause yourself and a lot of other people pain. Fifth, Process isn't a panacea for your problems, but you also can't just ignore it. You have to find the middle ground for your situation. Don't overemphasize it, but also don't just think you can get away with nothing. Sixth, it's more important to be working on the most important things than to have everyone working. I want to just say that again. It's more important to be working on the most important things than to have everyone working. This is as true in game development as it is anywhere else. Seventh, trust or its lack has a much bigger impact on game and product success than people realize. It's worth creating it and maintaining it. All right, that wraps us up. Thanks for listening. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did and are looking for more conversations like this one, join the Building Better Games Discord community. It's for leaders and producers in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems and who want to share experiences and learn how to lead and build better games. Check out the show notes to join. I'll see you there.